Hello, everybody. So, we just had the year end, and inevitably you see the top 10 albums of the year lists on a bunch of different media sites. And I'm always in search of great metal records. I want to be inspired in my own music making and to hear something that I haven't heard before, hear something that's composed well. I'm still very, very much enthralled by the music making process, and I really do want to hear stuff that is going to pique my interest and make me get that feeling I had when I was younger, where I just had to get home to my guitar. I was that inspired by something that I heard. So I go through these lists trying to find something that is going to give me that kind of feeling again. And this is a band that I've seen at the top of many, many lists this year, Oranssi Pazuzu, and I've known them previously just on a surface level as being part of that hipster black metal genre that is much maligned by metalheads, but very celebrated by indie rock fans who like the metal aesthetic. So I kind of knew what I was getting when I decided to give it a listen, but uh, going into this, I still wanted to have a clear palette. I haven't heard anything from their most current record. Maybe they were going to give me something a little more substantial than what I had heard before. The main issue I have with a lot of these hipster type of bands is the lack of any kind of melodic sensibility, any kind of melodic structuring, and I think that across the board, the concept of melody is dead in America. I mean, if you listen to even pop music from like 20 years ago, it was firmly rooted in a sense of melody to give the song structure, and now we have very little in the way of any semblance of melody in American pop. We have much more rhythmically based songs and much more repetition to kind of hypnotize you into thinking that you like what you're hearing. And metal has always been defiant of that, where pop had a decline in the use of melody. Metal had always championed the use of melody, and I don't mean like a consonant sound, like a Gothenburg sound. I mean just melody in general, like having a semblance of notes that defines your song. But now, within the last, I don't know, 10, 15 years, there's been like a plague of abstraction that's kind of infiltrated the metal genre with bands like Ulcerate, this band, where they're good at establishing mood. You get a vibe right away, and mood is important in your song. But they still can't provide a substantial layer underneath to give it something that you will remember. And that's the issue I have with Ulcerate. That's a band that I like the aesthetic of. I like the mood and the vibe that they give me. Aside from a few snippets of across their 7 album catalog, I couldn't hum you a single riff, and that's a problem. I know that that's something that's their style, and they have firmly cemented it. You know the band when they hear it, when you hear it rather, but uh, that's not something that I want out of the music that I listen to. And to me, it doesn't make it a timeless effort. It doesn't give it anything where it feels concrete to me. It's as if I enter a hazy room and then walk right out of it. That's the kind of vibe I get when I listen to that band. So with melody being dead across the board, we really want to salvage the bands that can still do it in the metal genre. And a lot of modern metal is kind of not able to even remotely have that basis anymore. And that's my main problem with it. Bands like this are flogging the horse of what melody was. But we're gonna try listening to this track here, seeing if there's anything in it that might have been an improvement over what I am used to hearing from them, finding out why it's on the top 10 of a lot of different charts right now for best metal album of 2020, and just seeing if there's anything there. So let's give this a start. right, so we're at 2 minutes and 50 seconds, and that is how long it took them to establish that first movement, that first mood, and there's so little happening there that it really. I mean, I know that you're trying to establish your mood. You're trying to give the song a benchmark to build on. I hope they build on it from there. But the problem with modern black metal, with the hipster black metal genre or whatever, is that black metal is one of the easiest metal subgenres to emulate without actually understanding the subtext of what black metal was back in the 90s. You can take the aesthetic, you could take the imagery, you could take the hypnotic vibe of remaining on one passage for a while, and you could try to do that yourself, but you're essentially copying just the superficial aspects of the previous black metal bands that were successful doing so, and doing what they're doing here. They're taking their established mood, making sure that the video that accompanies it has the creepy faces and the black and white imagery that the genre is known for. They're trying to give this an emotion. They're trying to assign it an emotion that is masking a real feeling of emptiness to me, as for what I'm hearing. The only real movement that you're getting from that opening passage is the swell of the keyboard line over what is essentially an unchanging key. I think it moves up a semitone and back down every now and again, but there's very, very little happening, and much of what made old black metal good. It's not my favorite genre by any means, but what made it work was the way the riffs actually worked together. You could jam on a passage for a very long time to establish your mood, but depending on what you went into next, you ended up giving that former passage meaning. And I want to see, going into how they develop this song, if getting through 3 minutes of that consistent mood makes this next part actually meaningful. Based on knowing how the ADHD mindset of modern metal songwriting works, I'm willing to bet that there isn't something that is about to come that will actually be a rational building on the mood they just established. So I'm going to go back a little bit to hear a few repetitions of what they just did and hear how this next part is going to go in. Okay, so they had a brief detour where they introduced like an angular sounding indie rock kind of riff. And the vibe I'm getting from that passage, I understand they wanted to take a notey type of sound and contrast it with the mood of the passage before, which had very little development. And that can be an effective way to bring across movement in a song. The issue I have with this is there wasn't so much an ebb and tide. There wasn't a swell to what could have been a legitimate climax here. There was just established mood and then immediate go from 0 to 60 kind of vibe with that angular sounding riff. Let's talk about the riff itself. That part is way less in line. It doesn't have to resemble the genres it's trying to pay tribute to, but when you're trying to work within a black metal template, a death metal template, there are established like riff tropes that kind of define the genre for what it is. And I don't like the idea that you cannot transcend those. I think that it is very limiting to think that, oh, this is established, this is a norm, you can't go beyond it, and that's a common criticism for people that think, oh, you don't like the modern stuff because it's just different from the way it used to be. And there is some truth to that. Everybody likes familiarity. Everybody likes what was established when they had first encountered a genre that was within its infancy. But the riff itself is way more in line with like, I don't know, it sounds to me like Sonic Youth-y, maybe even Coalesce, maybe even like something like Oxbow. Very little to do with black metal, and like I said, it doesn't have to. This band is trying to operate within the black metal umbrella, and the only thing that I am seeing that it has in common with black metal is trying to establish a hypnotic mood and having the guy screaming from a shower stall type of vocal. And I think the reason why bands like this get so praised is that they are actually not really metal, and people that are listening to modern metal now don't really like what metal is. And what they actually want to hear is indie rock with a lot of distortion and a person screaming over it, because they're used to the tonality of more an indie rock style, and they want to hear it edgier. And that's what this band represents to me. It's way more of an indie rock type of band with edgy imagery and black metal styled vocals. So that's kind of the issue that I have with the hipster black metal genre. A lot of the bands that are part of that, to me, that it's way more in line in spirit with what indie rock was, but with this veil over it to kind of fool people into thinking that it's actually metal. And you know, it doesn't have to resemble minor chords clashing on top of each other and tremolo picking. It doesn't have to be that. But what it should have is, if you're going to operate under a black metal genre, is it should have the arrangement styles in common. If you're going to operate in the death metal genre, you should have the arrangement styles in common. Death metal is essentially comprised of riffs colliding with each other to contribute to a greater whole. You're not going to be seeing a lot of the verse-chorus type of situation in the best death metal. Black metal, like I said, has that kind of hypnotic edge to it that this band is trying to emulate, but what gives those old songs substance is the ability for the riffs to play upon each other in a way where you're getting natural conflict and you're getting natural resolve. So this band gave us a brief snippet of what was a kind of a more important passage, in that they gave you a legitimate melody, and then it seems like they returned back to that verse riff. So let's see if they develop it even further. Okay, so instead of trying to take that second riff, which was a more climactic riff, build upon that, they decided to pull back completely, uh, break it down to the most abstract element, which is that consistent keyboard pulse, which is fine. I mean, the the idea of the hypnotic pulse has always been present in black metal. I mean, Transylvanian Hunger, that is entirely rooted in being a pulse-based music, and that's totally fine. Um, but to me, what they're doing is, it's and it works for the backdrop of the video. They're doing more of a cinematic type of sound than a metal-based sound, uh, in that it is so abstract, it is so based on mood and vibe, that it's a backdrop. It's something that should be playing behind something meaningful instead of being the focal point. And metal is always the focal point. Metal that is substantial is melody reliant. And this does not have that at all. And you could argue that that is not their goal. They do not want to have that backing because they're defiant against it. To me, I don't know what their motives were, but I do think they could have had a much more successful composition had they had the ability to construct melody behind what they're doing. Another thing that is an issue that I have with this band is that every review, every comment regarding this band is saying how original they are. This is not original. A lot of them are saying, "Oh, it's like black metal on mushrooms. It's acid trip black metal." If that is a new concept to you, you weren't paying attention in the '90s when bands like Soulfall, Fluidity, Dodheim's Guard, Ulver, Psy, When, nobody knows that band, Arcturus, all that stuff. All that stuff was melody based, fucked out of its mind, super weird, still within the black metal umbrella. A lot of people didn't like it in the metal genre, and I totally get why. Black metal is one of those genres that is, it's very strict on what you're allowed to do within the parameters of it, because you end up betraying the mood of what black metal is supposed to represent. And those aforementioned bands did that, but they did it while pursuing actually substantial music. I mean, if you want to hear what this band is trying to do, but in a much more successful and compositionally successful way, listen to any of those old '90s bands, like Soulfall's Neonism record. Very, very super weird record. Mood based, still also melodically centered. And one of the things that a lot of those bands that I had just mentioned, one of the faults that they had is that a lot of what they did to enforce conflict was to have starkly contrasting vibes to their parts smashed together, which I know is a songwriting flaw. But what they did with it was still establish kind of like a stridently confrontational vibe, that both stuck a middle finger up to what black metal was and provided them individual character for each band. That's something that you don't really see with bands like this and Altar of Plagues. I can't think of whatever else is similar in the hipster black metal genre. A lot of it is just nail your mood, try to establish on it as vaguely as you possibly can, dupe the audience into thinking that there is depth there, and then concluding with what could be a loud climax, just to give yourself the feeling that you took the audience somewhere when you really kind of didn't. And that's kind of where I think this is going to go with the climax that they're setting up here. Let's see how it plays out. So they hammered on a climax for a while, built upon it with kind of a guitar solo that, to me, had more in line with indie rock bands like Failure than anything within the metal genre. And that is not a direct fault. You can utilize whatever techniques from whatever genres you want to develop your composition if it works. Um, as for what this band is trying to present to me, the issue, one of the issues I have with them is that the other bands I had mentioned from the '90s that tried to challenge what black metal was, while still making it melody based, they were, for the most part, comprised of former black metal musicians trying to push the boundaries, and they were saying, you know, we're established, we know what black metal is, we're going to push what black metal is. To me, this is a band that doesn't know what black metal is, but is really trying to show that they belong in the genre. And I don't think they really know how. So they can fumble through a song that is trying to mimic the ebb and flow of older black metal with relying on very few themes, making sure that the climaxes feel natural, but there's so little happening here that it's just really hard to give it justice as something that is compositionally sound. And I know that when you're going into a mood-based genre like black metal, you're not going into it for being compositionally sound most of the time. If you want that aesthetic, you know, there's a million bands that can give it to you. This band is nailing the aesthetic. They're not giving me any substance behind it, and in doing so, they are managed to be called one of the most original black metal bands operating today. When you hear hyperbole like that, you have to understand that what that usually means is this band is not metal at all, and that's pretty much the conclusion I'm drawing from it. And it doesn't have to be metal to be good music, but based on what I'm hearing here, if you're going to take such a long series of passages to try to develop it and give it what feels to be a natural build to a climax and resolve, I'm not getting that here. When they needed to change parts in any way, they essentially did it very abruptly, or they dropped out completely to give the next part of it that much more punch. But it's more of a simulated punch. It's not a natural climax. So I'm not seeing the functionality of songwriting present in this band. And I'm sure they don't care about that. What they care about is nailing the aesthetic, making sure the audience feels that they've nailed the aesthetic, and trying to pull them through a series of edgy imagery and familiar tones that they are sold on what they're trying to peddle. I'm not really gonna buy into it. I think that if I want to hear this kind of music, there's plenty of older bands that did it better, and did it while still operating under a melodically centered composition. But this is the problem I have with modern music, the problem I have with modern metal, and I do not foresee it getting better because, once again, the aesthetic is the easiest thing to nail. If you want to nail that aesthetic, go ahead and hammer out a passage that barely moves, but do so in a way where you are getting that hypnotic vibe. Get your vocals down and just hit record and hope for the best. And chances are you're going to nail the very basic aspects of what black metal sounded like, but not what it was. So hopefully we see bands trying to capture what made it important and what made it substantial. But until then, I think this is why bands like this are called hipster black metal, because there really is just nothing there.